Washington is an Instagram educator and strategist for writers and authors. After 12 years as a secondary school teacher, she retrained as a social media manager in 2017 and for 7 years worked with small businesses who wanted to get more visible online. In 2023, she pivoted to bring her work more in line with her passions, writing, and books, and now works with writers and authors of all genres to show you how to use Instagram effectively to get more readers, launch your books, build authentic connection without drowning in the digital chaos, and most importantly, how to make Instagram work for you and not the other way round. I'm delighted to welcome Nicola as my guest to the podcast. Hi, Nicola Washington, welcome.
Hello there, Isabelle. Thank you very much for having me.
It's a great pleasure. So, can you introduce us to you? Anyone that's listening who might not have come across you before, tell us what you do and how you work with authors.
I am an Instagram strategist and educator for writers and authors, which basically means that I work with writers and authors to show you how you can use Instagram to get your brilliant writing out into the world, to get it in front of more readers. I specialize in Instagram purely as a personal preference. I do actually work with other platforms as well, but I really specialize in Instagram because I rate it first and foremost. I do think it can deliver great results. I find it the most fun platform personally to use. And I also think that the platform itself offers a lot of different opportunities and options for writers who
Mm,
sometimes, if you're not like an image person or a
mm,
showing up on video person, or you're not contain my ideas in 240 characters person, it gives you different options of delivering your ideas to an audience. So
mm.
yeah, so that's what I do and why I specialize in Instagram. So I do work with other platforms as well, but just not to the same extent.
Yes. So tell us how you got here. I'm always interested in how people have arrived where they are
No.
now. Because I think you haven't always done this, have you?
I have perhaps an unusual route to what I now do. Straight out of university, I qualified as a secondary school teacher. I taught English for 12 years. And then I had my own children and realized that the combination of the demands of that particular job, plus having children, plus having a partner whose job was incredibly demanding, and he was out before the kids were waking up and back after they were asleep, I just couldn't do that anymore. So at the time, I was blogging and I was using Instagram to promote my own blog. And so this was about 2016. And I realized that there was an opportunity there because in 2016, Instagram marketing or social media marketing for small businesses was starting to really grow as an option. So I went away and I retrained. I took a 6-month course with an organization called Digital Mums, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. But what they specialized in was getting mums who were out of work back into work because, obviously working as a social media manager is relatively flexible compared to other kinds of jobs and certainly compared to teaching. So I
Mm,
did that for 7 years where my clients were small businesses.
mm,
Most of them were female owned, were small businesses that marketed to parents and mums specifically, so whatever products that they were selling, their target market for those was mums. And then right at the end of 2022, obviously things were very, very wobbly right across the board in all kinds of sectors. And the small businesses that I was working with suddenly were finding things very difficult. And I had a handful of clients who basically in the space of about 3 weeks all turned around and said either we can't afford to keep you on or we need to cut your hours.
mm,
And I had a panic for about 2 weeks and was like, what on earth am I going to do?
mm,
But previous to that, for about the previous 2 years, I've been working with a writers group on my own writing projects, just as a creative, fun thing for me to do. And
mm,
along the way, I'd also kind of casually been advising those writers because there's 6 of us all together. 4 of the 6 of us have published at least one book in that period of time. So I was kind of advising them just very, very casually on how they might use social media to promote their own books. And I just had this moment where I was like, oh my God, like I've been doing this for 2 years, just casually off the cuff with my friends, what if there was a market there where I could combine my passions for writing and for books along with my expertise and skills that I built up over the previous 7 years of working with small businesses. And so I sent out voice notes to my writing group, and the instant response was, "Oh my God, yes, please! Like we're desperate for this." And so, right at the beginning of 2023, I really started investigating that and growing my audience for that purpose. Because previous to that, all of my small business work had come through word of mouth. I'd never had to market my services. So I
Wow.
had to start marketing myself in order to find a new pool of clients who are writers and authors. So I started working full time with writers and authors in around June 2023. So we are now, I suppose, coming up for nearly 2 years of doing that. And it's been fantastic. I mean, it's gone incredibly quickly, that 2 years has. And it's probably the best business decision I have ever made because I just love working with writers and authors.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's how I got here.
I love the story, and there's a lot of synchronicities with my story. You know, because I was a publicist, and then
Mhm.
in a similar way to you, I'd started working with female entrepreneurs and small business owners in that kind of big rush of everybody going online in
Mm,
2020. And then, sort of by accident, you know, realized, oh, there's a lot of authors and writers out there who just don't have the resources,
yeah.
the funds, the resources to be able to work in that traditional way with publicists and marketers. And it was finding a way
Mm,
that we can kind of help people that is much more accessible. And obviously for you, then it's also been a journey of, because yeah, marketing yourself and also teaching others
yes.
how to do it at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It has been quite a journey actually, because that first 12 months especially of doing what I've always done for other people for myself
Mm,
was a surprisingly steep learning curve, actually.
mm,
And also just the nature of the services that I was offering had to change because as you rightly say, writers and authors don't often have or ever have the
mm,
budgets to hire me in the same way that businesses used to. So I used to literally go in and just run platforms for people.
mm,
And of course, writers and authors don't have the budget for that. And actually, when it comes to what writers and authors are selling, there is a disadvantage sometimes to getting somebody else to run your accounts for you because what people really want is to sort of get just a little bit closer to you, the writer who traditionally has been put up on this pedestal, and social media is a way for you to sort of just increase the intimacy of that relationship. I mean, I'm not sort of talking about people becoming best friends, but certainly allowing some insights and personal connection to develop. And so,
mm,
writers and authors, are really well placed to be in direct contact with their audiences. So, actually, even if you had the budget to employ somebody to run your platforms for you, I'm not absolutely convinced it would be the best idea anyway. So,
mm,
what writers and authors were needing from me was more workshops and programs. And
mm,
I've launched a membership last year to sort of teach writers and authors how you can use Instagram primarily to reach your readers in a way that respects the other demands on your life, because that was also a big thing for a lot of writers and authors, because most writers and authors who I work with also have a job, also have a family. They have many, many demands on their time and energy.
mm.
So I was having to develop my own marketing strategy, my products that I was actually selling to people and services that I was selling to people,
Yeah.
while actually delivering things and making money, obviously to support my own family at the same time. So it was quite intense. I feel like my feet are starting to sort of I feel a bit more grounded,
Touch the ground a little bit.
but it's taken a while.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible journey, and it just shows that how much you understand about how difficult it is
Mm,
for writers and authors who don't have marketing backgrounds, who are not social media savvy
yeah.
necessarily, or they've maybe used Instagram to connect with family and friends, but they've never used it on that
Mm,
level
mm,
of attracting readers. And I know from my work with authors, I mean, you've touched on one of them already. One of the biggest challenges is, how do I fit it all in?
yeah.
How do I do my marketing at the same time as writing my books?
Mm,
And I think the second one is that showing up
yeah.
challenge, isn't it? Are these things what you deal with authors?
They are. I think the time one is massive.
Mm,
Well, I think the time one is massive. I think that also with authors and writers tend to be quite introverted as well. So sometimes the visibility aspect of getting on social media and being more visible
mm,
feels quite strange. And then I think as part of that as well, there is often a worry with for writers and authors about the way in which they're being perceived as like big-headed, egotistical by telling people about this thing they've created and wanting people to buy it essentially. So very often I actually find the sort of technical aspects of using the platforms relatively easy to overcome because it's like learning any set of skills. It takes a little bit of time initially. Everything's a bit slow and stumbly and clumsy at first,
mm,
but with enough
mm,
repetition, you get more and more fluent. It becomes more and more easy. And there are ways of using the platforms, especially for writers and authors whose audiences don't expect them to be expert video editors. There are
yes.
ways of using the platforms that really work well for writers and authors. So the technical side of things, very often people will sort of say, well, I don't know how to make a reel. But once you've taught people how to make a reel, they know how to make a reel. They can go away
Mm,
and they can make 10 more.
mm,
But the more sort of psychological side of things is trickier, definitely. And also the time thing is massive. And I usually will say to people about the time thing that it's very important not to conflate the time that you might spend casually scrolling and engaging in things that are interesting to you, or just, I don't know, just for fun or escapism. Like I have quite a morally neutral position when it comes to scrolling because it gets demonized so much. But actually, for some people, it can be a way to, for some people, they find it dysregulating. For other people, it's actually a way to regulate. It's actually something that they can do for 10 minutes that just sort of takes them out of the
mm,
day-to-day sort of, I don't know,
mm. Whatever
grind
pressures are
and
going on. Yeah.
maelstrom and pressures,
Yes.
and that's certainly my relationship with it. But what tends to happen because of the nature of the platform, and I'm very, very clear-eyed about this, that the platforms are designed to keep you on them in
Yeah.
whatever way they can find to keep you on
Yeah.
them. Your eyeballs are their currency, so they're going to try and keep you there. But what happens is that people go, well, Instagram takes up too much of my time and I don't have time for it. And then when we break down how are you spending your time,
Mm,
very often what is happening is people are conflating that kind of casual use of Instagram with the strategic use of Instagram for them to find their readers.
yeah.
And those two things or should be really quite separate. There are, you can have like a set of tasks that you need to do each day, which are purely about you finding and building relationships with your potential readers, which are completely separate to using Instagram to scroll or in other ways for entertainment or whatever it might.
Yes. Yeah, it's that intentional use, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love that you said actually, because we hear it all the time, don't we? Doom scrolling and scrolling
Yes.
is the worst thing you can possibly do. But I'm really glad that I think that you're the first person who's ever said that. That
Yeah.
actually it's maybe not something to demonize. And I don't know about you, but I always find a bit of scrolling gets you into the zone and gets you seeing what conversations are happening
Mhm.
and
I
and
think,
and, and how can I contribute to this
and
conversation.
also when you're starting out, so there are so many moving parts to this, like, bit of
Mm,
conversation about kind of
mm,
doom scrolling and the moralizing, I think, that quite often happens around the time we spend online. I feel like it's only a problem if it's a problem. If it is something that is making you feel bad, then it's a problem. If
mm,
it is something that is taking up hours of your time each day that you otherwise would spend on other things, then it's a problem. And I do think there are times where it can stray into that territory. And equally, there are things that we can do in order to get back that control. I talk about this quite a lot in my newsletter because I really strongly, having been there, I've worked in social media for 7 years, and
mm,
at one time or another, I was working on multiple platforms for multiple clients. Like,
mm,
I get it. I know how difficult these
mm,
platforms can be. I also strongly believe that for most people, there are things that you can put in place to combat a lot of the downsides to it. But it does take discipline and it does take rigor and it does take intentionality and awareness of what is actually happening in your
mm,
brain when you go onto
mm,
these platforms. But
mm.
then the flip side of it is, I have gained so much from these platforms by using them very intentionally. I have made friends. My entire writing group came together as a result of meeting via Instagram. I have made friends, people who I've never met who share the same interests as me. I have learned, or at least started learning about something that I've then perhaps taken offline and read books and listened to podcasts and watched documentaries or whatever. But the
Mm,
starting point has been on Instagram. It does make me sometimes a little bit sad when I hear how it gets demonized, because I think what you're describing isn't true and doesn't have to be true for everybody.
mm,
But our ancient brains have not evolved quickly enough to keep up with the tech. And we have
yeah.
to give ourselves the opportunity to learn how we can use these
Mm,
platforms with conscious awareness, rather than allowing the kind of habit forming parts of our brains to dictate the ways in which we use them. Like, I am very clear eyed. They have been designed to keep us hooked. And it is only by bringing awareness to the way in which we use them that we can counteract some of those effects. And I'm not perfect. I've done a lot of work on myself and my relationship with these platforms. And there are times that I slip, but I know now how to get back to a place of ease and peace with the platforms. And so I really strongly believe it is possible for most people in most situations to put in place kind of safeguards for themselves to make sure they're not spending time they don't have just aimlessly scrolling on the platforms.
yeah. That's brilliant. I think everyone can take a lesson out of that. It's, yeah, finding how it doesn't control you, isn't it?
Yeah, and
It's, yeah.
if there is anybody who is listening now who
Mm,
would like to learn more,
mm,
there is a book called The Phone Fix by Dr. Faye Baghetti, who also has a brilliant Instagram account called, um, is it called The Brain Doctor? That's it, The Brain Doctor. And she is a neuroscientist and an NHS neurologist,
right.
and she approaches this issue from the perspective of brain science,
Mm,
where she tells you what is happening in your brain when you find yourself building bad habits or problematic habits, and how can you combat it. And it is a fantastic book. It's very practical. It's got this science-led approach, but also very, very practical tips and advice about how you can
mm,
tackle it. And I've found it really, really useful.
yeah.
So that's a
Yeah.
definite recommendation from
Well, I
me.
shall definitely look that up for one. So we've kind of talked about the challenges. What are the things you love most about working with authors and writers? Because it sounds like you're also a writer yourself, aren't
I
you?
am, yeah,
Yeah.
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 So I'm not published. I hope to be one day. I'm
Mm.
currently querying agents with my first full-length fiction project. So I'm also kind of starting a new one while I'm querying agents. And yeah, just love working with writers and authors. I love the variety of the people that I
Mm.
get to work with. I learn from my clients because obviously in order to help them, I have to kind of consume some of what they're creating. So I very often learn brand new things.
Mm.
I think that's part of it, is the variety and the novelty of the different kinds of work that my clients are doing. But also, I find writers and authors typically have an approach to wanting to reach their readers that is more about the quality of the relationships they build via social media than it is about quantity.
Mm.
So, like, pursuing follower counts, pursuing follower numbers is the quickest way for social media to become a really frustrating, demoralizing place to be.
Mm. Mm.
Whereas if you center the people who are going to be your potential readers, it becomes then much more expansive and much more relational, because you're actually prioritizing the people and their interests and what they care about. And I find that the writers who I work with, on the whole, that is what they want. They want their time on these platforms, obviously, to deliver results. We can't ignore that entirely.
Mm.
The
Mm.
way in which they want to get to those results is in a kind of a more thoughtful, more values driven way, rather than just doing whatever it takes to accumulate a certain number of
Yeah.
followers, which I also love. Like, that has always been my approach. Even when I was working with businesses, I had a community first approach to
Mm.
social media, which was the idea being that you bring people in, you bring people along on the journey with you, and because they are kind of invested in that business or now in that writer and author on a more personal level,
Mm.
they are much more likely to want to become one of your customers, to want to become one of your clients. They feel connected to what you're doing in a deeper way rather than just sort of seeing what you sell and that being the end of it. So, that's one of the other reasons why I particularly love working with writers and authors, because my experience is that that is what very often drives writers and authors is they want to connect with their readers
Mm.
beyond their books. They want to have that feeling that there's some reciprocity there beyond their
Yeah.
books, because books are so detached from the creator of them. So a lot of writers and authors enjoy that element of social media, so that suits me as well, and my the way I prefer to work.
Yes, it's not a numbers game, which is
Yeah.
something that, yeah, I think online there's a lot of talk about reaching the biggest number of readers, ad strategies, all about numbers. But
Mm.
yeah, so it's
And
so
yeah,
important.
and it does have its place, ad strategy has its place, and when you are putting money behind something, you probably are just wanting for it to get in front of as many
Mm,
relevant people as possible. But
mm,
organic social media, when you build up a network of people who are invested in your work, even if it's 100 people, you have to remember the ripple effects that those 100 people can then create, both in their real worlds, but also online themselves. Because if each of those 100 people who you've built a relationship with, where you're having, I mean, again, I want to stress that this is not your best mate, right? But you're having conversation around things that you both care about, and you have 100 people who then have 100 people of their own who they share your stuff with, who
mm,
they recommend your stuff to.
mm,
And very often people have more than 100 people, of course, within their networks. So there's this ripple effect that can also be created. So that's the other thing that's really important when it comes to social media, is not to focus primarily on your numbers, because that's not the only thing that matters. What matters is the depth of the relationship that you have with the people who are following you, and are they going to be your cheerleaders? Are they going to be your biggest fans who are going to want to go out there and tell other people about what you
mm,
do? And
mm.
that is something that social media can help you to develop. So yeah, there is a lot of chat around numbers, and of course the internet is littered with stories of people with huge followings who get a book deal off the back of a huge following, but then the book sales are relatively poor because the following they have online, they're not readers, they're not
Yes,
book buyers.
yes.
So there is this misalignment between, well, they have this huge audience and the product that is being
Mm,
created. So, even a large audience is no guarantee if the audience isn't relevant. And what writers and authors, if they use social media strategically, can do is create a really strong, invested, small community,
mm,
highly engaged community,
mm.
who then, when it comes down to the book sales part of it, can drive sales, because first of all, more of them are more likely, a higher proportion of them are more likely to buy the book in the first place.
Yeah.
But then also you get this ripple effect because they're so invested
Mhm,
in what you're
mm.
doing. So that's why I don't dismiss the concern around numbers entirely. However, I sometimes think there is an overemphasis on numbers
Mm.
and a lack of understanding of how platforms can drive sales, even if the author themselves doesn't have a massive
Yeah.
Instagram or other platform following.
Big fight, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'd just like to pause today's conversation to let you know about something very special I will be running for authors in June 2025. My authors retreat at the absolutely stunning location of Arddoch, a private venue on the banks of Loch Lomond in Scotland. This retreat is focused on allowing authors to meet with other like minded authors, unwind and relax in the most luxurious, very private setting on the doorstep of one of Scotland's most breathtaking locations of natural beauty. The retreat gives you space and time to indulge your own creativity and to tap into your vision for your future author journey, goals, and success. You will be provided with an inspiring, reviving, expansive break away from your everyday world. to connect with yourself, your inner creativity, and of course, to have some fun with other authors. Workshops will be included. We'll be working on defining your vision for your author brand and guiding you through the next steps for your author success. We'll be combining these practical workshops with nourishing and nurturing practices, including yoga and a beautiful mindful walk. With the empowerment that comes from being surrounded by a highly supportive and welcoming group of authors who are ready to learn and grow in community, the Authors Retreat is a truly powerful experience. I would love to share it with you. Please go to the website buildyourbrandwithpr.com, where you can see all of the details about the retreat. And please do contact me if you have any questions or you could be interested to come along with us. If there's authors listening going, oh my God, I need help to crack Instagram, and I need to, they really want some guidance on how to do this. What are the kinds of books, authors that you work with? Are you working with kind of all genres, or have we got preferences? Or
I do. I don't have preferences. It's a little bit like asking me to choose my favorite child. I really don't have preferences. I've worked with fiction authors. I've worked with middle grade and children's authors as well within that, and then memoirists and also non-fiction authors across different niches. I'm currently working with a couple of writers who are writing a book to do with sports psychology for children. I've got another client I'm working with who is writing a book that's to do with smartphones, and particularly for a guide for parents and their children getting smartphones. I have a client who's working on a World War II novel that comes out in May this year. Got memoirists as well. So a real broad spectrum, because while the content differs from writer to writer, because your reader differs and what they're going to be interested in differs, the approach is actually always the same. The approach always centers, kind of, it looks for the connections between your book and your ideal reader. That's always the approach. So, we'd always dig into who is your ideal reader for this book, because this book isn't for everybody. So who is it for? And then we look at, okay, well, in that case, how can we now package up the book or bits of the book or ideas that spin off from the book into shareable content that you can use on social media that is going to appeal to your ideal audience, and then get them coming along for the ride and get them invested, getting them wanting to buy the book, and then also share it with their networks. So the approach is always the same, regardless of the niche. The author is always the expert in their field
Yeah.
of whatever they're writing
Yeah.
about, and I am the social media expert who
Yeah.
just teaches them how to package it up for
Yes.
social media.
How many people come to you going, "Oh my God, I can't make reels. I don't know how to do the." I
Mm.
mean, how much of it is it overwhelmed with the tech side of it?
Oh, absolutely. I think overwhelm is a massive part of it, because there are so many buttons and levers to push and pull now on,
Yeah.
on Instagram
And
or
they keep
anywhere
adding new
else.
ones all the
And they keep adding new
don't
ones.
they?
I know that they didn't want to leave us alone. And if you went back to sort of 2016, 2017, which is when I was starting out, there were very, very few options. So
Mhm.
it was a
Mm.
much quieter place, I think. And
Mm.
now it is much louder and much faster and, borderline overstimulating if you spend too much time
Yeah.
on there. And I do think it can just sort of feel a bit terrifying. So yeah, a lot of it is overwhelm. So when people come to me and just say, I don't know where to start, I say, okay, well, then we start where you're at.
Mm.
This is where we
Mm.
begin, and that's how and then we build from where they're at. So they might be a casual. I do occasionally get people who have never used Instagram at all. So we
Mm.
take it at that pace. We start there with how to set your account up and just how to post simple things, and then build in the skills. And then other people who've used it more casually, like you say, to sort of update their family and friends with what's happening in their lives, who want to become more strategic. And so we just sort of, it's like learning anything. I find out where people are at, and
Mm.
then we just start building in new skills depending on how they want to work, because of course that also changes things in terms of like exactly how I do things. It's a process. You can't, I don't, there is no way that someone could come to me, sit down for 2 hours and then know everything they need to know about Instagram, because they would just feel if I just like fired loads of information at them for 2 hours or something, they would feel completely overwhelmed. So yeah, it's a step by step thing, baby steps, just building skills like anything else. Like, I don't know how to be a publicist. I wouldn't know where to begin. If I came to you and said, "Please, can you tell me how to do this?" Then you would figure out what I already knew and build from there.
Mm, yes. What's your kind of biggest piece of advice then for authors who are struggling with Instagram? One of the questions that I get a lot is how often should we post? How much should we be posting? I'm guessing that's something that you hear as well.
It is, it definitely is, and there is no one
Mm,
size fits all answer, of course,
mm,
like there is with lots of
mm,
things.
mm,
If you want your account to grow quickly, which
mm,
a lot of writers who are seeking traditional publishing book deals, especially with nonfiction books, there is kind of an expectation that you probably will need to be posting, 4, 5, 6 times a week, maybe
mm,
even more, depending on how quickly you want your account to grow.
mm,
But the big caveat to that is before you even start posting, you need to have done the work to figure out who your audience is and what are they interested in, because otherwise you could be plowing an awful lot of time and energy into posting things that are never going to work for you because they're never going to appeal to your ideal reader. So, the volume of posting actually is always secondary to the foundational work of figuring out, well, who is my audience and what are they interested in? And what am I going to talk to them about that they are going to be interested in? So that is always the first step, regardless of how quickly you want your account to grow. I think of it in different modes though. I always think like if you've got an Instagram following and you just want to sort of very low stakes start to test different kinds of content. You've got an account, let's say a few that's got a few hundred followers, but you're not really ready to be plowing lots of time and effort into it yet because maybe you haven't got the book deal, you don't have a deadline yet,
mm,
maybe you're not ready to be querying agents with your book proposal,
mm,
which is usually the point at which agents turn around and say, "What's your Instagram following like?" Specifically for non-fiction writers, it's different for
mm,
fiction writers.
mm,
If you're just doing things in a very low stakes way, just giving yourself the grace to experiment, post 2 or 3 times a week, different post formats, different post topics, see what flops, that is fine. Because people very often sort of think that a post that flops means the idea is bad, and it might not be the idea, it's the package. Well, it probably won't be the idea, to be honest, it'll be the packaging.
mm,
So it's all about kind of figuring out how can I communicate my ideas to my ideal readers in a way that's going to get in front of them and get them to take notice. That's really important, is give yourself the grace to not see the results that you want to see. And then if so you're just doing that, you're kind of just maintaining things, you're testing things 2 or 3 times a week. If you then want to kind of like nurture people and bring people along a little bit more on the ride, 3 or 4 times a week is plenty. But if you're
mm,
growing your account, as I said a couple of minutes ago, that's when you really have to ramp up the volume of
mm,
content with
mm.
that really important caveat of making sure it's the right kind of content.
Yes.
There is no one size fits all answer. And a lot of it comes down to your individual capacity as a writer and author, the
Mm,
stage you're at in your publication journey. Because if you are a fiction writer and you have a book deal, you're waiting for
mm,
edits, that
mm,
could give you, I don't know, a few weeks to sort of ramp things up into on that end, on the sort of marketing end of things, to test things a little bit more, give yourself the opportunity to see what's going to work for you, and then dial it back down again when you need to get your head down and deliver that next round of edits to your
mm,
publishers. So it has to be very flexible. I think this is what else is different about my approach with authors and writers compared to the approach that I used to have with small businesses, which was much more about the same level of consistency all of the time. But
right.
that's just not realistic for most writers and authors. And the other thing I would say is that if you're right at the beginning, the best thing you can probably do is stop posting for a month and go and have a look at what other people are doing who
Mm,
are in your genre or in your niche, and start to get a feel for, what do I feel drawn to myself? Like, what are the kinds of content that I can imagine myself doing? And then also what is working for other people. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you, but at least it gives you a place to start from. And then stop doing that because you don't want everybody else in your head. So do that for a
Yes.
month
Yeah.
and then start to play around with those ideas and putting your own spin on those ideas. It's a little bit like you wouldn't set out to write a book if you'd never read a book. You know, if you are writing in a particular genre, you probably love that genre and you've been reading it for the past 5 years or possibly longer. So, in a weird kind of informal way, you've studied it, you know what works.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with getting out there and using social media. You need to give yourself a place to start from, and looking at other writers and authors can provide that.
There's some amazing advice there, Nick. Thank you so much. You've shared so many golden nuggets here. So just to kind of finish up then, so you mentioned you have membership
Mm.
for authors. If there are people listening that want to go and find out more about you and how they can work with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, sure. So I have a membership which I host on Substack, which is a monthly subscription fee. And what people get for that is they get a weekly check in where we talk about content ideas, what you're going to be posting that week. And I can give kind of little bits of advice. They also get exclusive video tutorials and things like that. So, you know, when you were saying about how do I make a reel, that's the kind of thing that I might do a tutorial and then post that into the
Right.
membership. But
Mm.
I also invite along authors to speak about their own experiences of marketing, like how have they marketed their book. So there are real sort of like
Mm.
people who've walked the talk, coming
Yeah.
in and giving
Yeah.
their own insights, what has worked for
Mm.
them. And that's all hosted on Substack. I developed that for two main kinds of people. The first kind of person is well, maybe three actually, three main kinds of people. The first would be somebody who just wants to upskill, who wants to sort of just get the ball rolling quite gently, but
Mm.
doesn't have the time or possibly the money or even the motivation because they haven't yet got a book deal to work with me one to one. And so the membership is a way of kind of like holding their hand through it and starting to upskill. I've got a handful of people in the membership who I have worked with one to one who just wanted to stay in touch on a sort of less intense way than working one to one,
Mhm.
and also less expensive way than working one to
Mhm.
one, of course. And then the other kind of group of people who come into the membership are people who already have a really great understanding of Instagram and how it works, and they feel quite confident with most of it, but they
Mhm.
just want a bit of accountability and a bit of sort of encouragement sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's kind of who the membership is for. And then I have one-to-one services that, generally speaking, the two groups of people the one-to-one services work best for are non-fiction authors who have been told they need to build a platform or grow their existing platform in
Right.
order to secure a book deal,
Right.
or people who have so this is indie authors
Mm.
or traditionally published authors who
Mm.
have a book launch date that they're working towards and they want to kind of build momentum. They sort of want to cut the corners a little bit. They don't want to waste time
Yes.
trying things that aren't going to
Find
work.
things and
Uh,
galvanize the audience a bit before.
Exactly, they just
Yeah.
want to get
Mm.
really get things going, and so I have,
Yeah.
you know, people who come to me usually 6 to 12 months before their book comes out, and then we
Mhm.
work
Mhm.
together for usually I mean, it just sort of 3 to 9 months, depends. I've got one client who has been working with me for over 12 months, but she's a very specific kind of writer.
Mm.
But yeah, that's usually how it works. So they can find me on Instagram. My handle on Instagram, I'm sure you'll put into the notes
Yes,
as
we'll
well.
definitely put all
It's
that in.
too much social, too much underscore social. And my Substack, the free version of my Substack is called Too Much. So if you search my name with Too Much, that's what that's called. And that's where you will find me.
Fantastic. Well, all of that sounds amazing. The membership really does sound brilliant. So I'm sure there'll be lots of authors out there thinking that that could be extremely useful. But
Yeah,
we'll put all of that in the show notes as well.
amazing.
So thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. Brilliant to chat with you, and all the best for going forward with your authors. And I shall see you on Instagram, no doubt.
Yeah, thank you very much,
Mm.
Isabelle. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.